Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. What's up, everybody? Today is Thursday, August 6th, 2020, and this is episode 2 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. I've got a great show for you lined up today. In a little bit, we'll open the treasure chest, learn something new. Later on in the boss battle, I'm going to explain why I skipped class my senior year of high school, and hopefully my mom isn't listening, and hopefully my daughter never will. At least until she gets out of school. Before we get into all of that, though, a little bit of news and updates. So, with it being August, school is back in season, and that looks a lot different for a lot of you out there. Most of you are probably like me. If you've been in this game for any amount of time, this is a completely new start of the year. So we're just going to have to remember to be flexible. We've got school starting in September, some starting now. Some of them are doing fully online, some of them doing hybrids, some of them doing all face-to-face. There's no limit to the types of school openings that we got this year. We are currently in the middle of an extended pre-planning, which is actually pretty nice because I've been able to get a lot of stuff together. But at the same time, it just kind of delays that anxious first day of school kind of feeling. And I'm just kind of ready to get going. I know it is probably going to be a pretty hectic and stressful year. Right now, I've got 3 different preps that I'm doing both face-to-face and online, which is actually the best option that we have right now, considering what happens if students start online, but at the end of the grading period decide that they want to come back to face-to-face. Just what it does with numbers and taking away teachers from the classroom. So that's the kind of setup that we have, and it will be a little stressful, keep me busy, but at the same time, I am still looking forward to getting into it and to just making it happen. I think the waiting game has been what's made me the most anxious. I want to get started. I want to get it going, whatever that looks like. So hopefully you're dealing with all of this. Make sure, like I said, don't take things so seriously. Don't get overly stressed out. We're all in this together. We're all in a situation that we're not familiar with. So don't feel like you have to have it together. I very much don't, and I don't know that I ever will. But don't forget to take care of yourself. Reach out if you're getting stressed, if you're getting burned out or whatever. But it is that back to school season. So for those of you who are getting started, I wish you the best of luck. And just get out there and do your best. And just remember that flexibility is the theme for this year. In some Google updates, though, on the Google keyword blog, they've just recently posted a new post about their .new domains. If you're not familiar with the .new domains, it's a shortened URL that makes it easy to create new documents and such. So the standard ones, docs.new or slides.new, will create new Google Docs or Google Slides, but that domain has been extended. Now they have things like pdf.new to create a new PDF, create.new for Adobe Spark, podcast.new for Anchor FM. WordPress is even on board with this. Blog.new and I think post.new are connected there. So it's really cool that Google has set this up to make it really easy without having to do a bunch of clicks. So normally you might have to, open your drive, click through folders, create a new document or whatever. Now you can just open a new tab and docs.new, you got a new Google Doc going. But there is a site that they've got, what's.new, will actually tell you all the different domains that they have available. So I think last time I looked, they have over 200 of these, anywhere from, like I said, all the Google apps. They've got WordPress, Anchor, a lot of the Adobe online apps. It's really great. I'll stick a link in the show notes and definitely check it out because it can help you with maybe some of the apps that you use in class even. But that's all I got today for news and updates. So why don't we go ahead and take a look and see what's inside the treasure chest. Today's treasure chest is another Google Chrome trick, and this has to do with the incognito window. So if you don't know about the incognito window, it's the keyboard shortcut is Control-Shift-N, or if you hold Control or Command on a Mac and then click a link, it will open that link into an incognito window. Essentially what incognito window does is it opens a new window that's not attached to your accounts or anything like that. So it's not going to save any passwords. It's not going to add anything to your browsing history. It won't be logged into your Google account. And so what I think it's very useful for is checking everything that you're sending out, checking links, checking forms, and all that kind of stuff. So, for example, if I have a Google Doc that I've created, anytime I open that doc, regardless of what kind of link I click on, it's going to open that doc where I'm in editing mode. And that's because I'll be signed in to my account that owns that Google Doc. So an easy way to check how students or parents might be able to see that is to open whatever link you're sharing out in an incognito window, and that's going to show you what it's going to look like from anybody that's not on your account. So it makes sure that you've got some of those share settings correct. One of the things that is super useful with it is if you're trying to send it out to public like parents or something like that. If you have the share setting set to your school domain and a parent tries to open it up, they're not going to be able to because they don't have your school domain account. And then you're going to get flooded with emails asking for requests. So before you send that link out, check it in an incognito window. And then you'll see if you've got the correct settings on there. And there's several other things that you can use incognito mode for. But I love using it to check and make sure I'm sending the right stuff out. So hopefully that treasure chest gave you a little bit more wisdom, a little bit better use of some online tools. Up next, we're going to have our boss battle. As we prepare to start a new school year, or some of us may have already started, and this year is looking different for lots of us in different ways. Some of us are starting online, some of us are starting in person, others doing some type of hybrid, and Some schools are waiting till September. There's a lot of variety, a lot of uncertainty around how the school year will start. But one thing that is consistent every year is that the beginning of the year is a really great opportunity for us as teachers to lay down strong foundations for solid relationships with our students. And I always try to focus a lot of the things that I do at the beginning of the year to leave myself the opportunity to start working on developing those relationships with students. Now, this is obviously not the only time you do that. Relationships with students is something that is going to span the entire length of the year and years after that. And a lot of you know that. But the way we start the year off can really set the tone for how our students perceive us as teachers and how they respond to us as far as developing those relationships with them. So what I've done today is I've come up with a list of some tips and things that I do and that I've seen other people do that really can lay those strong foundations at the beginning of the year. So I'm just going to kind of go through and elaborate some on some of the things that I do and also look at why I do some of these things too, because some of it has to do with my own personal background even. So the first thing that is incredibly important to me is a very simple one, and that's learning students' names. Now, before I go any further with that, this is one that means a lot to me, mostly because of an experience that I had in high school. I was one of those rule-following kind of students. I never got in trouble, but I got in trouble one time in school, and that was for skipping class my senior year. But there's a story behind it. So I had signed up for a weightlifting class because I was an athlete in high school, and that was just a natural part of the daily schedule, was taking a weightlifting class so that you can do that in addition to practicing after school and all that. So I signed up for this class, and what it actually ended up turning out being was what I would just call a basketball class. So the coach at the time was the girls' basketball coach, and so it was the last period of the day. Me and probably about 5 or 6 other guys were in this class, and the rest of the students in the class were on the girls' basketball team. And so basically each day he would send us to one end of the basketball court, and he would take the girls to the other end, and they would run drills and things like that while we just kind of sat around playing basketball. Now, personally, I have nothing wrong with playing basketball in class, maybe, but that's not what I signed up for. In addition to that, he pretty much just didn't pay attention to us. So he would take roll, take attendance, and then we'd go to the locker room to change, and then we'd come out and we'd play basketball. Well, I got kind of, smart about it, and I would go and get marked present, and when we went to the locker room to change, there was actually an exit door to the gym right next to the locker room door that led right to the student parking lot. So what I would do is I would get marked present. When we'd go to change in the locker room, I would just go through a different door and I would leave. And the thing is the coach never even bothered to learn who I was. He called my name one time, here, and then move on. He never even knew who I was. And so I did this for a long time, just because that was not the class that I had signed up for. And then eventually, I guess in the spring of that year, which, this went on for quite a while, but in the spring of that year, I guess he finally kind of realized or something that I had been doing this, and he actually had to ask some of the other students in the class who I was to do a referral. And that really stuck with me because you can't show a student that you care about them if you have no idea who they are. And so when I started teaching, I kind of made it, a pact with myself, the way that I want to do things. I always make it my goal by the end of the first week to know every single student's name. Now, I know that's a lot. I have anywhere from, 120, 150 to some years 200 students. It's a lot of names to remember. And it is a struggle, but I turn it into this kind of game. So, I go through and I make sure I call them by, whatever name, whether it's a nickname, their middle name, anything like that. I write that down on the first day, and then I will find times throughout the class period to just walk around the class while they're doing something, and I make it a game. And, I tell them that by the end of this week, I want to know everybody's name, and they can quiz me like anytime. Just walk up to me, what's my name? And what that does is it pushes me to focus on learning them and who they are. And so far, I've been able to do that every year. Now, I feel like I have quite a challenge this year because if a lot of my students are wearing masks in class, I'm not going to be able to see their entire face, and that's part of what helps me recognize who they are. So I feel like I got quite a challenge ready for me this year, but that's still going to be my goal. By the end of week 1, I want to know everybody's name. I want the students to know that I know who they are, and that I'm keeping up with them. The second thing that I like to do is, it's simple. It sounds so easy and so simple, but sometimes I think we forget to do it, is to just find times to talk to students and get to know them. And I know a lot of times teachers will do questionnaires and things like that at the beginning of the year. I do the same thing where I ask them, who they are, what name do they prefer to go by, what kind of hobbies, sports, clubs are they involved in at the school, anything like that. But in addition to that, I find times in class to just have conversations with them. I will take activities and find things to have them do at the beginning of the year that are things like maybe some diagnostic stuff to help me learn what levels they're at in different things, or some easier intro kinds of activities that they can do on their own, which frees me up to walk around class and just kind of talk with them. And I try to notice things. If they're wearing a shirt with a band on it, maybe it's a band that I know, and we talk about that. So I always try to find those connecting points with them, common interests that I might have with them. Whether it's music, whether it's video games. I talk, a lot of students I connect to with things like Marvel and Star Wars and all that. But even outside of that, I talk sports with a lot of my students. I'm a big University of Georgia fan, so I always have students who like to rag on me because they're Alabama fans or Auburn or Florida or whoever. Or if I got students that play soccer or soccer fans, we talk soccer. So I try to find a wide variety of interests to connect with them, which also, again, helps me learn their name, who they are, and all those things about them. The third thing that I do is I might go a little bit overboard with it, but I try to just be quirky, to show my personality to them. We're all different. We all have different personalities, and part of my idea in the classroom is to take the person that I am and bring it into class, not try to be some kind of, facade that's not who I am. And there are things that I do change. I'm not as outspoken and outgoing as I am in class, but, I still like different things. I have different interests and all that. And so I try to put that stuff up around my room. I have an Atlanta United flag hanging behind my desk. I've got some different bobbleheads and Funko Pops of Star Wars, of Iron Man, of, all kinds of stuff. I found this little plastic Iron Man mask at Target, and I just had a moment where I wanted to make it look like Iron Man. So I have this, it's sitting on a shelf and there's a light underneath it. It makes the eyes glow. Just little things like that. So like when they walk in my room, they can tell who I am. They know what I am, and it kind of humanizes me. The other thing I do that always gets a really good eye roll, but is also something that students often will miss, is I have a calendar right now that has a dad joke for every single day. And I love puns in general, but dad jokes are so bad that they're great. And so I always start off class with a dad joke. And at the beginning of the year, it's one of those things where students kind of look at me and they are confused. They don't understand it. They roll their eyes at me, all that kind of stuff, whatever. But eventually, they come to kind of expect it, and it is something that a lot of them actually look forward to. I have a lot of students that if I forget to tell them the joke, they'll say, "What's the joke of the day?" Or if I'm absent, sometimes I'll get, when I put a message up on Google Classroom, they'll ask me what the joke of the day is. And again, it's those little connections like that end up going a long way. So being quirky, being you, whether it's the way that you decorate your class, the way that you talk to them, the way that you act, be your authentic self. The fourth thing I do, and I think this one is a great thing, is to greet them at the door. I know that as teachers, we are incredibly busy. And the 4 or 5 minutes that we have between class is a time where a lot of us might need time to take a breather, to get things ready for the next class, to tidy up, whatever. But I always try to make it a priority to be standing outside of my door and greet every single individual student as they walk through my classroom door. And again, so at our school, it's kind of a requirement. They expect all of the teachers to be outside of their doors, to keep an eye on things in the hallway, make sure nothing gets out of hand. But also it's great to build those relationships. It helps students know that they're a priority to you. The things that we put our time into, the things that we busy ourselves with, are the things that are high priorities. So if we say that we care about our students, that we love our students, but we don't take the time to do things for them, underneath all of that stuff that we say is the message that you say you care about me, but you're not really taking time. And so I always like to do that. And it's also just a nice time to have conversations with them just as people. We're not worried about class. We're not worried about an assignment. We're just worried about how people are doing. One of the things, we went through a training 1 year about developing relationships with kids and all that. And one of the things that they talked about, and a lot of you have probably seen stuff like this online, is shaking their hand when they come in the door. And the idea is that it is developing maybe some of those lifelong skills, the proper ways to interact with other people and all that. But it's also just a fun way to greet somebody, because I don't always do a handshake. Different people have different philosophies on some of that, and I know this year is going to be weird. Handshaking with the COVID-19 pandemic being a thing is probably not going to happen, but it's a great way to get creative and original with your students. Maybe you fist bump them or elbow bump them or do a little foot tap, or I want to get some of my students in on the big college football leap in the air and bash together, but one of you falls down because the other one went too hard. I don't know. Or what I'm going to dub as the Santa shake, where maybe you squirt a little bit of hand sanitizer in your hand and then shake their hands, and now you're both sanitized. I don't know. But whatever it is, like, it's something that can be fun to develop that kind of unique relationship with a student. I've also, I had some students who just came up with their own this past year. They thought a regular handshake was boring, and so they're like, well, let's do this, Mr. Tucker. And like, I'm all for it. Show me what you want, and we'll do it. And so it was not every student. It was only maybe a handful, but I had like a unique handshake greeting for those students. And again, it's one of those things that humanizes you. It's making you real in their eyes. A lot of times students perceive us as being this kind of non-human entity. When, they see me at the grocery store and I see them in class the next day, they're like, that was really weird that I saw you at Publix, because teachers don't need food, I guess. But I get it when we present ourselves as this distant kind of person, then that is the perception that students have with us. So greeting them, give them a handshake or a pat on the back, whatever. Find your thing that works for you. And then the other thing that I do along with that is I like to genuinely ask them how they're doing. We, especially down here in the South, we have this, hey, how you doing? And it's a greeting, not an actual question, right? How's it going? Good. How about you? I'm good. And that's as far as it goes. But I try to take it to a more genuine kind of level, because again, showing them that you actually care. After a while, you start to learn your students, you start to understand their personalities and can read them well. And so, a lot of times if I have students who come in, they are very obviously in a bad mood or upset about something or whatever, a lot of times I'll kind of stop them on their way in and just, hey, you doing okay? You look upset, whatever. You all right? And, a lot of times they'll blow it off. Yeah, I'm fine. And, I don't push it much further than that. But, a lot of times they will be honest with me and say, I'm having a bad day, or this happened, or my girlfriend broke up with me, whatever. But it gives me that opportunity, even if it's only 10, 15 seconds, to just love on them and say, hey, I care about you. I'm sorry you're having a bad day. I hope it gets better. And let me know if I can do anything to help you. And things like that go a long way for students. So have those moments, at the door as they're walking in. That's a great time to really help develop those relationships with them. And a little side note on that, something that even just this past year I've come across, making sure I try to make sure that I'm prioritizing the right thing as students are walking in. So I know, and a lot of you probably deal with the same stuff with things like dress code issues. So if students can't have hoods on their heads in the building or hats on in the building, and I think a lot of times we end up making that the priority, to where if a student's walking into my class, the first thing I say to them is take your hat off before I say anything else. And again, think about the message that's sending. So what I like to try to do is to compliment first and then take care of dress code or discipline issues next. So if I see a student walking in with a hat on, I know he needs to take it off. But first, I'm going to greet him. Hey, man, how you doing? You doing okay? Good day. I'm glad to see you. Hey, could you take that hat off for me on the way in? And one of the things that I noticed is that by doing that, I'm not only reinforcing the positive relationship that I have with that student, a lot of times they will start to enforce things themselves. If I've got a student who every single day I'm telling him to take his hat off. Eventually it gets to a point where I say, hey, how are you doing today? And before I ask him to take his hat off, it's off. And again, it's just that constant positive reinforcement that helps them to see that you are looking out for them, that you care about them, and they're willing to a lot of times go a little bit of an extra step because of that kind of mutual respect. So think about that when you're interacting with students too. Compliment first, discipline after that, so that it doesn't come across as just a discipline thing. It comes across more as a relational kind of thing. Next thing on the list, and this is something that you could do in class at any given time, and it doesn't take too long, is just conversation starters. Throw out some goofy questions, some would you rather questions, some pose some weird questions to them, sort of like what I'll be doing with a lot of the interviews. I like to start out with some of those goofy questions because, we sometimes take things way too seriously, and sometimes you just need to kind of sit back and be goofy a little bit. So I like to throw those out sometimes and then let them talk to each other while I walk around and learn more about them. So if I, throw a question out there, would you rather drown or burn to death? Which is a very morbid one, which I probably would not do with students, but that's the only one that comes to mind right now. I'm listening to them talk through and sometimes debate about which one's the worst fate or whatever. And it gives me some insight to them. Maybe them choosing between drowning or burning to death does not give me an in-depth personality, but it shares a little bit more about them. And so sometimes those goofy questions can lead to deeper discussions. It can lead to interesting conversations that really help you connect a lot more with those students. So think about that. There are lots of apps and websites that you can just get a bunch of random conversation starters and do at the beginning of class. The next thing that I like to do, especially at the beginning of the year, which I think is another way of helping students see that you respect them, is to have things that allow you to let them have input. So what I mean by that is instead of it just being you setting up everything for them, find some creative ways to let them have some input about how things will go in class. So things like rules and procedures. What kind of things can you have them give you input on? So, for example, I've developed in my classroom, I guess it would be kind of my rules, guidelines. It's the 3 B's. It's be respectful, be responsible, be relentless. And so at the beginning of the year, I'll go over that stuff with them. But instead of me creating a list of a bunch of rules of what we do and what we don't do, I will have them put together something, maybe in groups or whatever, that says, all right, here's my motto: be respectful, be responsible, be relentless. And then I pose the question to them, what does that look like in a class? And so you're having them give you input of, what would it look like for me to be responsible in class? What does it look like for me to be respectful in class? What does it look like for me to be relentless in class? So it's not just you telling them what responsibility means to you as the teacher, it's them coming up with what they think is responsibility, and then talk about it and discuss it and put some of that stuff together. And when, again, the more people, whether they're teenagers or adults, the more input they have on something, the more ownership they feel towards that something, which means that they're going to invest more in that. And so even something as small as having them give you input about rules and regulations and procedures and how things will work in class, it gives them that investment. So those are just kind of my beginning of the year kind of things. Those help me lay foundations for my student relationships with me. And again, a lot of those are things that I carry on all throughout the school year, but they're relatively easy, short, non-time consuming ways that you can set up this idea that you want to be there with them because you care about them. Now, the big question this year, we're in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic. Some schools are starting online. What do we do about that? How do we develop relationships with students that we don't even see face to face? So I came up with a little list of some alternate ways that you can do some of this. I think the principles are still the same, learning their names, greeting them when you see them, and all that, but the format that we might do that in could change. So if you are starting your year online, here's a list of some things, and I'll have this stuff listed in the show notes of some alternate ways to do some of this that you might be able to do pretty well. So the first is to set up some individual video conferences, either through Google Meet or through Zoom with the students. You got 30 kids in a class, having all 30 of them log on at one time is not going to work. You're not going to be able to meet them and get to know them very well. But depending on the numbers in the class size and all that, you might be able to do one-on-one conversations and have little 5-minute conversations with them. And so a student logs on, you spend 5 minutes just talking to them, introduce yourself to them, asking them some questions about themselves. 5 minutes later, you got another student. If your numbers are bigger than that, think small groups. Maybe I can get in with maybe about 5 students and spend 5 to 10 minutes talking to them. If it's 5 of them, I'm still learning about them individually. So, Google Meet, Zoom is a good way to have some of those conversations. You can use Flipgrid to have them do some video entries. If you're virtually, online, have them do a Flipgrid video of like their study area to introduce who they are and where they're going to be working. So they have a desk in their room, film that, post it up on Flipgrid. It gives you a feel for them. You're going to see some decorations and things that show you their personality, all stuff like that. Padlet is another great source that you could use for introductions. You could have them take a selfie and post it in Padlet and type up a little short bio underneath. And then you've got like a whole bulletin board there with all your students and information about them. And it allows them to meet each other. So they'll see pictures and bios of students that they may or may not know. One of the things that my wife stumbled across a few weeks ago is a Google Slides virtual locker. And I'll see if I can maybe get a copy of hers to post in the show notes to give you an idea. Basically, it's, she found this picture of a locker that was open, and if y'all have seen the Bitmoji classrooms, it's essentially the same thing as that, but with a locker instead of a classroom. So they post their Bitmoji or an avatar or something like that, and then they decorate the locker with all of their things that show their personality. So school logos, icons about hobbies that they have, books that they enjoy, anything like that. So I thought that was really cool way to introduce people to them. You could even create a class Google Slides and give each student a slide, so then they have they can see all of them. And then the last thing, this is I use, in class or virtually, is just a Google Forms survey. I use Google Forms a lot just to keep up with a lot of information. So I have all my students go in, fill out just information about them, and then I have it in a spreadsheet that I can easily access if I need to go back and look at something, or I might look through those during my planning period just to kind of reinforce some names and some hobbies and all that kind of stuff. And I've got it all there in one single document. So those are some different ways, if you are online at the beginning of the year, some things that you could do to help develop relationships with students. So hopefully that gives you some really good ideas of some things that you can use right here at the beginning of the year to help lay those really strong, solid foundations for positive, strong relationships with your students that will continue on even past this year after they have left your classroom. Next up, we have the 8-Bit Crew Members Board. Before we get into this week's question of the week, I did want to share some feedback from last week. Last week's question was essentially, what is your story? How did you get to where you are in education today? And I did have a response on Twitter from Katie Powell, who said, my education story really took off when I started connecting with other educators. I really empathize with that part of your story. My first AMLE conference, which is the Association for Middle Level Education, I looked out at thousands in the general session and realized there were others like me, so powerful. And I agree, my first big conference was that same way. So, Katie, thanks for reaching out and sharing. Katie's actually an old college friend of mine, so I might have to get her on the podcast. She's got a book out that has some great stuff in it. And if you want to follow her, she's on Twitter at beyond_the_desk. So, Katie, thanks for sharing. This week's question of the week is connected to the boss battle from today. And essentially what I'd like to know is, what is one thing that you do to lay a strong foundation for good relationships with your students right away at the beginning of the year? I talked about some of the things that I do. Some of you may use some similar ones, but what is it that you do right there from the start that helps you build those strong relationships? So you can respond on Twitter. You can tag me at Comic Socks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. For longer entries, you can leave your response on the comments section of the episode page on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. All right, well, that will just about wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to connect with me online. You can follow me on Twitter at Comic Socks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. Check out the blog at 8bitinstructor.com and my YouTube channel where I put up EdTech tutorials. I'll be adding more videos regularly to that. Do me a favor, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app, and you can leave a review. But more importantly, make sure you tell others. We want to build up a strong community of support and encouragement. And so the more people we can get, the stronger that foundation will be. Also, make sure that you check out my Udemy course on using Google Classroom if you need some help getting set up for potentially teaching online. I'll put a link in the show notes along with a promo code that will get you a really good price. And last of all, if you want to support the show, visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/8bitinstructor. I've got a couple of different tiers on there, and I have some stickers available for some of the tiers. So check that out. And until next week, keep your sword sharp and keep your shield strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Comic Socks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week.